Hey everyone, welcome to season 11 of the Tension Podcast. We're a show that acknowledges most of life and faith is lived in the tension between the two extremes. Each week we look at what many of us were taught growing up in evangelical churches, we weigh it against what our current culture is saying, and we try to find what Jesus has for us in the tension between the two. If we haven't met, my name is Jonathan Crone, and we're joined as always by our co-host, Mr. Eric Williams. Eric, go ahead and say hey to the people.
Sorry, I wasn't really paying attention to anything you were saying there. Just wasn't even
Is that
listening.
you weren't listening? Nothing
No.
new. I mean, I figured you were coming up with your next joke or your next comment
No,
that you're
come
going to
on.
say.
I was just trying to tee up the topic for today.
And the sad thing is, it took me a second to realize that's what you were doing. And I thought we were going to have to redo the intro. But then it's like, oh, he's doing this. He's doing a bit. He's doing a bit, but he didn't tell me he was doing a bit. So now it's awkward. And I'm trying to get out of it without making it even more awkward. But then I figure if I need to get out of it without making it awkward, I should make it as awkward as humanly possible and just hope
There you
that we
go.
can get through it.
So, hey, people.
Well, hey, if you're new to us, if this season we're looking at the idea that cultural Christianity is killing the American church. 3 weeks ago, we introduced this idea and went into all those definitions so you could see where we're coming from. In episode 2, we talked about how there's no place for moderates in the American evangelical church. And last week, we talked about how our language around abortion makes those who have had an abortion feel unsafe in the church. This week, we're going to talk about a more subtle piece of evangelical culture that had great intentions, but has actually led to people getting a negative feeling towards the church. And so today is a more nuanced and a more subtle way. It's one of those things that back when we were Unlearning Youth Group, in the first, I think it was like 6 seasons of the show, we always acknowledged that most of the things that ended up with bad results had good intentions. And I think today's topic is one of those things that it had great intentions and it just went to a place that had bad results because those great intentions didn't actually happen. So we're going to get to that in a minute. But before we do that, I want to remind you the way that we have defined cultural Christianity this season. The first definition is spiritually immature Christians who have been discipled more by evangelical culture than the actual Bible. The second definition is Christians who are more concerned with applying their Christian preferences to the culture than they are in achieving unity in Christ with those who may have different preferences. Today is that first group, those who have been discipled more by evangelical culture than the actual Bible, than it is the second group. And the reason I say that is because what we're talking about today, when you've been in church for a while, especially in the evangelical church, you think this is the only way you can do this. This is the only way that you can essentially evangelize. But we're going to get into those details in a minute. Before we do that, if you like the show, leave us a rating wherever you listen or watch. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, it'd be a huge help if you wrote up a small review. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button on today's video. Okay, let's introduce the big idea for today, Eric.
Yep.
And it is because of the way many Christians have been taught to evangelize, many people outside the church believe Christians care more about proselytizing than actually loving others. I'm going to say it again because I use big words. Because of the way many Christians have been taught to evangelize, many people outside the church believe we only care about proselytizing instead of loving others. And let me break down those big words for people who maybe you don't care about church terms. But evangelism is defined as the spreading of the Christian gospel by public preaching or personal witness. Proselytizing is the attempt to convert someone from one religion, belief, or opinion to another. And if we're not careful, these two distinct ideas can become intertwined in ways that are not helpful or loving. There are a lot of descriptions and distinctions of the differences between evangelism and proselytizing, but my favorite summary that I found says that proselytizing is preaching solely for conversions, while evangelism is leading with love for the person and showing them Jesus through that. And what it comes down to for me is the difference between telling versus showing.
Yeah, I think there was something that, as we're coming up with this distinction, I remember back in, what do we call them? The O's? Is that the aughts? I
The
hate
early
calling it the
aughts.
aughts. but it's the early 2000s, right? In the 2000s, I guess was what I would say. But yeah,
The era of the greatest music ever,
so we,
says the
there you go.
38-year-old.
So, uh, when I was getting into church world and church planting, we would have a name for some of this type of stuff, maybe in a different flavor, but we'd call them like coffee cup Christians. It'd be the Christians that knew the popular coffee cup verses and would just use those, or they were the too blessed to be stressed Christians, or they were the it's just like very surface level, and I think that's where that idea of evangelism proselytizing comes in, where it's like the coffee cup Christian version of evangelism is proselytizing. So, you've got you've got something for everybody. We've talked about this in other episodes where, let's say you're going through something tough and you're mourning something, and somebody goes, "Oh, well, every time God closes a door, He opens a window." And you're like, it's always window. It's never window. It's always window. And, and there's never a verse associated with that or anything else like that. And it's like,
God will never give you more than something you can
He
handle,
will never
Eric.
give you more than you can handle. His setback is
God
just
won't
preparing you
give
for
you
your.
more than you can take. Sorry,
It's
Caleb,
the,
circa 2012.
God's giving you this setback to prepare you for your comeback. All this kind of stuff that's like just so shallow and just so like empty and devoid of what you actually need in that situation. So if you're listening to this, you've probably been in this situation, which is probably one of the reasons why you're listening and struggling, is like you've been in a situation where something bad has happened and you've gone to the church, similar to what we talked about last week. You've gone to the church and the reaction has been either hate back towards you, or what we're talking about here is like very like surface level, no empathy, no actual meat to what you're supposed to be as a Christian. Now take that to Jesus's coffee cup command of and then go into all the nations and baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Oh, okay, got it, good, ready, set, hike. And then you run out and you're just like going out and evangelizing what you think is evangelism, but you're really trying to just convert people because God has, somehow you've got it as it's a numbers game, which it's not. And that's when it becomes sleazy. That's when it becomes proselytizing. That's when it becomes, it's no longer about actually discipling and evangelizing and sharing the gospel and getting through that love of Jesus to others. It's a numbers game. And well-meaning Christians all over, mostly America, but all over the world, are just falling prey to this idea and forgetting that this is about a people thing, not about just bumping your numbers.
And I don't say this to go political, but I'm going to describe a type of person I'm sure many of you know. And I see this on a regular basis, but it's the guy posting "Let's Go Brandon" memes all over his Facebook while also saying, well, the world just needs Jesus and Christ is the
Yep.
only way.
Yep.
And if
Yep.
we would just come back to Jesus, it'd be okay.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that disconnect of F you, Biden, which is what he's saying, and the
Right.
world just needs Jesus.
Yep.
And that type of person is more concerned about making converts
Yep.
than they are about making disciples. It's about
That,
converting a culture and being saved from hell more than it is about becoming like Jesus and responding out of love for him.
yeah. And one of my examples I literally just saw was a kid that I used to, well, not a kid anymore, but a young man that I used to have in youth group. And on his Facebook page, I saw a meme, and it was Homer sleeping with a shotgun, and it says, "Me sleeping knowing that my possessions mean more to me than your life." I was like, huh, okay. And then you go to his feed and it's all about God. It's, God, family, this, all this other kind of stuff. And it's like the disconnect there is shocking, and yeah, sure. It could be just a funny thing that he thought was funny in posting, but I think it's a sign of something deeper that people
It's
actually
emblematic
need.
of a bigger picture that we're talking about. And that's why I say this is subtle and this is nuanced.
Yep.
There
Especially
is a
like,
type. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. You go.
You go.
Okay, so it's like the God's gun, God's guns blank people that have their bumper stickers that are like God, guns, and then whatever. And usually it's Trump or it's something else like that, right? And it's like that disconnect of connecting those things together when they shouldn't be, or connecting those things that seem very much disconnected. Same as when
God,
we
guns,
talk
and
about
Tennessee football.
yeah, right. God, guns in Georgia, the Georgia Bulldogs or whatever, right? That's whatever that happens to be. And then all of a sudden, you wonder why there is a conservative evangelical. We have this idea of conservative evangelicals as, well, we gotta just shut down abortion, but you know what? After the baby's born, not such a big deal. We're so pro life, but bring on the death penalty, and let's go and kill our political rivals. And it's like, it's such a far cry from if you actually like took these meanings and took the things that you say you believe and integrated them into their life. It's a siloed situation. It's I posted it the other day. I think you and I were talking about it, where Pastor Ben Kremer, I think is his name, Kramer, but he said, you just don't realize how weird it is for evangelicals to grow up thinking that you can only vote for a anti-abortion candidate with high moral standings, only to be told now that you are forced to vote for, in order to be a Christian, you have to vote for a convicted felon who is pro-life. It's like, whoa, we have taken our we have taken our morals and our values and thrown them away for kind of empty platitudes. And what I would really consider virtue signaling, what people on the right would point to people on the left and say, oh, you're just virtue signaling these things. I think this is the Christian form of virtue signaling. Oh yes, Jesus is number one in my life, but then you go on and you act as if that's not the case.
And we've taken a few minutes to describe an attitude and a way of looking at life that is prevalent in today's culture. And I want to take that attitude and apply it to the big idea for today. And that's where, because of the way many Christians have been taught to evangelize, a lot of people outside the church believe Christians care more about proselytizing than actually loving others. Many people outside the church feel like Christians care more about converting them from their beliefs to our beliefs. And the way that plays out, Eric, you said in the first episode of this season, you said cultural Christianity is so much more ingrained in our lives in a way that is just not surface level anymore. And this idea plays out in that because it's one of the subtle ways that an attitude has permeated over the years based on how we were taught. And let me get into that. In many churches across evangelicalism, Christians are taught the best way to share their faith is by listening to other people's stories. And when they hear a similar issue to something they've experienced, respond and show how Jesus made a difference in that specific things. So an example would be, if Eric, if you and I are talking and you bring up something about how you're dealing with depression, or you feel you've had anxiety or something like that, because I've experienced that, this evangelical teaching and training would say, hey, I need to respond to Eric and tell him how Jesus helped with my depression and my anxiety. And you can replace depression or anxiety for whatever issue you face in your life. This method, while it was developed in good faith by well-meaning pastors, has over the course of many years led to a culture where Christians, in an attempt to share the gospel with others, have begun listening to respond instead of listening to love. One pastor I know describes this as listening to fix the other person instead of trying to journey with them as they experience this.
It's a weird nuance too. When we're talking about nuances, it is a weird nuance too, because it's like you definitely don't want to I hear a little bit of like the it can go both ways type of thing, where I'm like, yes, when I share, I would like somebody to share their perspective and empathize with me. But that's such a fine line between one upping. Oh yeah, and I remember one time I was suffering with this and I got went through a bankruptcy and my wife divorced me and all my dogs died and it's like a bad country song. And then all of a sudden, Jesus just brought me out of it and I'm better for it on the other end. It's like, whoa, bro, that wasn't empathizing with me. That was one upping me in your pain, right? That's different. At the same time, I also think it's valuable because, you sharing with me and saying, hey, yeah, if I share with you a tough time I've gone through and you go, yep, I know how that feels, or I've felt something similar, and here's a couple of things that have helped me. I don't know if they're going to help you. Like, it takes a very, nuanced approach to not one up, to not just say, oh yeah, Jonathan, don't worry about that. I mean, it's not a big deal. It's like when you look at your kids, right? And something tragic happens in your kid's life to them. They didn't get the classroom job they wanted. Oh, I wanted to be the line leader, and instead, Colton got to be the line leader. And I'm sitting here as a 40-year-old man, like, oh my, what? Listen, kid, I dealt with 20 more important things in the first hour of my day than your little problem. But at the same time, that's their whole world. So I think there is a little bit of like being able to step in and go, yeah, when when a teenager comes to me, and is sharing something, or a young adult, or a non-married person, or a kid, somebody with young kids, and they share these things, rather than me going, yeah, just wait till you get older, then you really got to worry about stuff, right? You can step in with right, it's like you step in with empathy without one like downplaying what they're doing, and without also one-upping them. But it takes skill to do that.
Well, it takes skill and it also takes a life that represents what you're trying to say, too. The reason we bring up the coffee cup Christian or the LGB Christian or whatever it is because if your life over here isn't representing Jesus, then when you go and try to throw in the Bible verse or the here's how Jesus helped me, it feels like you're just telling me that because you want me to convert to what you believe.
Yep.
Nowhere else, like the other parts of your public life are not representing this. But now when I go through something, you're wanting to bring Jesus into that. And what that tells me as someone who doesn't hold the same beliefs is, oh, okay, you're just trying to get me on that side. You're trying to get me over to your team. You're not actually trying to love me or trying to help me. You just want me to come to your side of the conversation so I can see the world the same way you do.
Yeah, it's almost like with like good customer service people, and I know you guys are frequenters to Disney, right? So you've been around good customer service in that aspect. You can tell when somebody is just going through the motions and saying the things they have to say because they have to say it, and then other people that are like, obviously there's probably other places they'd rather be, but they're genuinely interested in trying to help you in this
Mm-hmm.
situation. So you could go to Chick-fil-A. Yeah, like Chick-fil-A is a great example. There's a Chick-fil-A by us that it is not the Chick-fil-A that I know and love. But if you go to
They
the
don't have
right Chick-fil-A,
homeschoolers. It's regular
yeah,
people,
and
not
it's like
homeschoolers working
they're
there.
like, my pleasure. They're going through it because they have to. They're wearing the stuff because they have to, but they are not the genuine homeschool kids that are working there. They're like, yeah, what can I do for? Oh, are you kidding me? I would love to. Blah blah blah. So it's like
Thank you,
that.
Beth Ann. I really appreciate you. My pleasure.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like they don't really genuinely believe what they're saying. Like when they go, "Oh, my pleasure," and I'm like, Is it really? Is it really, or is that what corporate told you had to say? Right. So it's the same type of situation where are you genuinely trying to give me a Bible verse for my good and for my comfort, or is it just because that's what you were told to do? Or is it just because it's like, oh, I'm insecure about my own faith, that if you're shaking in faith and you start to doubt, now I don't know what to do because that cognitive dissonance is painful.
So, what are we to do? Like, obviously, as Christians, we want to tell other people about Jesus. That's part of what we're told to do. I hate the idea of share the gospel and, if needed, use words. I hate that idea. Like, it takes actually talking to people about Jesus, not just showing them. So, it's show and tell, not show or tell.
Yep.
Um, but how do we balance this idea of evangelizing versus proselytizing. I think the first step is checking our intentions and being really honest with ourselves. Are we trying to love people, or are we trying to tell them about Jesus?
Yep.
Those two things aren't always mutually exclusive, but they often compete with each other, because someone who's going through a really rough time, they don't need you to fix the situation by telling them how Jesus helped you. They oftentimes just need someone to show them a little empathy and care. I mean, there's going to be a time, if you build that relationship, where you can show how Jesus helped you, but maybe they just need a hug or a listening ear or something like that on the front end, instead of what I, what I have found feels like in this situation. The Bible verse cultural Christian response feels like a shrug off. If it feels like you're trying to get me on their team, but like I've heard that from other people who are not Christians say it feels like they're just trying to get me on their team. So there's that side of it. But even as a Christian, when someone responds with that mindset, what I hear is, I don't care what you're going through. Here's a Bible verse. Can we move on to something a little more fun?
Right.
That's what it feels like. And when you do that, let's go back. Even especially when you have the public witness of something that doesn't represent the love of Jesus, that is very argumentative, left or right. I've seen this on left, I've seen this on right. That is very argumentative and combative and wanting to win people to your side on cultural issues. Then when you brush me off with a Bible verse or a curt, oh, well, this is how Jesus helped me, but you can tell you're just trying to get through the conversation.
Yep.
That's not loving. That's not how Jesus did it. And it turns people away from the church. And I think too many of us are more focused on either our comfort or our own agenda to slow down and do the listening it takes to really love someone, instead of just trying to fix or convert them.
Yeah. But that also takes understanding why you are doing what you're doing. You know, why? Because I totally get it. It's like there is a brush off piece of that. There is a uncomfortability piece, because I think as Christians, especially as like American evangelical Christians, especially as like a male dominated American evangelical Christian, we are not comfortable as a society with allowing people to be in pain,
With feelings in
and
general.
yeah, other than anger, it's okay, man. If you're angry, that's good. You're a man. If you're angry, if you get angry, if you get jealous, if you get, that sort of stuff, that's just, yep, let it out, man. That's what you need to do. But like other sorts of feelings, which I think is going back to some of our talks on mental health too. But in general, we are not, we don't want to sit there and work with somebody through their pain. And I've admitted it too. Like one of my issues growing up, like I love my family, great family. One side of my family is like first generation German Americans, right? So very much we don't talk about feelings. There are no feelings. It's not funny. We don't laugh. Like that side of the family is way different than my other. And I think I've kind of realized, and also going through therapy, understanding like I've grown up knowing that big emotions were not okay. And not anything that anybody did on purpose, but that just was the culture that I was brought into. And so the idea of sitting with somebody else in a big emotion and being like, man, Jonathan's upset right now, that's not mine to fix. That's not my responsibility. And honestly, I don't have to do anything about it, but I can acknowledge it. And I can say, Jonathan, I see you there. If I'm here, if you need something, right? Like, how can I help? How can I support? how can I just be here in this moment rather than trying to fix something, rather than trying to avoid, because really we think we're fixing it, but we're like, I'm going to toss a Bible verse at you. I think about, like, I don't know why that image from Monsters Inc. just popped up, where they got Boo, the little girl, and they're just like tossing Cheerios into her mouth, right? Because they're scared of her and want to avoid her. It's like, I'm just tossing Cheerios at Jonathan, going like, yeah, sorry. Like, they're just Bible verse tossing at you. Like, yeah, dude, just whatever. Just don't get that gross feelings and emotions on me. I don't want to deal with it, right? Don't get any worse. So we are not comfortable with it. Now, what I think is great about, like, thinking through the history of Christianity is, like, the idea, if you even think through, like, the Jewish tradition of sitting Shiva with somebody after they've, a time of mourning. Like, there is a mandatory, or at least at one point, there was a mandatory, like, 7-day mourning period where after someone passed, it was required. You mourn for 7 days. They had regulations over what you wore, what you could do, that sort of thing. But, like, then they would actually sometimes, like, have professional mourners come and mourn with you that were just really, really good at it. And that sounds a little weird to us now, but if you think about it, what is a therapist, right? Other than, like, a professional feelings talker,
Grief
those sorts of things.
counselor.
Yeah, grief counselor, right? Professional mourner. It's like, I'm going to come in and I'm going to sit with you, and you are not expected to do anything for 7 days. Then, after an appropriate amount of time, we are going to say, okay, now we're going to move on. But allowing for that space to allow feelings to happen, instead of trying to avoid, trying to brush off, trying to run away from them right away. I mean, I even think through when my mom passed, it was like my first reaction was, I'm going to get dad out of the house and we're going to go do something. And we did. And then, like, that very next day, it was like, we're going to start cleaning up her stuff. And like, one day, and all of a sudden we're just, like, erasing the memory of my mother. And looking back on it, I was like, maybe that's what we had to do to get through in the moment. But was that super healthy to just kind of shove those feelings down and move through them? I don't know. But it did expose in me that's like, I'm not comfortable with allowing myself or others around me to have emotions that I don't have to do anything with or react to.
I think we have to realize people are messy and they go through hard and messy times, and that's okay. And it's not our job to fix them. Jesus didn't tell us to fix our neighbor and make sure they're living right. He said to love them. And part of loving them is pointing them to Jesus when it is appropriate at the right time. But that requires us to be more focused on loving them than converting them. And in the American evangelical church, that's a big deal, because I'm going to get on a little bit of a soapbox here. The American evangelical church has positioned salvation as a soul thing, a get to heaven, escape hell type of thing. That's the most important part of salvation. That's an incomplete view of salvation. Yes, where someone's soul goes when they die is a big deal. But Jesus came to earth, lived, died, and rose again to restore everything back to the way it was meant to be. That includes life here on earth. So while someone's soul absolutely 100% matters, we have to care more about the person here on earth than their soul in the afterlife. People need us to care for them now and later. Both are there. So I hope you see the nuance here. But I mean, there's the old line in missions work that says people respond to the gospel a lot better with a full belly than they do when they're starving. And that's why we go places and feed people first and do food programs before doing other things. And people respond to the gospel a lot better when they know you love them and when they know you care about them. And when they know you care about their humanity as a person here on planet Earth right now, more so than what you care about when they die. When we get that out of whack is when things like this start happening. But people need us to care more about them now. And sometimes a hug is more healing than a Bible verse is in the moment. And we have to realize and care for someone enough to know the difference.
Right.
But if we're just discipled by evangelical culture, we will think their soul is the only thing, or is the most important. I won't say only thing, is the most important thing in this conversation. But if you look at the Gospels and the way Jesus approached people, he cared for them and loved them long before he said anything about any type of afterlife.
Yep.
Come follow me so you will have a full and complete life. And you'll go to heaven. But I came to give you life and life abundantly and save you from hell. It's a both and. But we cannot forget the part of creation is groaning for restoration, and we are Christ's partners in bringing that restoration to earth, knowing it's not going to get done, but it's our job to try. And we should care more about loving people and restoring them back to where they need to be, healthy and whole. Jesus is a part of that, yes. But sometimes a hug is more healing than a Bible verse. And we got to learn the difference.
Yeah. Man, all of that.
I'm off the soapbox now.
What'd you say?
I'm off the soapbox now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think all of our approaches here just it brings back the idea of how much we are shaped by culture and how much we are shaped not only by culture but by our generations, by current events, things like that. Because I think like our view, or the view that I'm talking about, or we're talking about on like what's dangerous, I think is the thing that we're seeing nowadays, where it's giving a lot of like boomer parent mindset, or Gen X, the way Gen X was raised, where it's like, suck it up, move on, right? All the things you see on Facebook where it's like, we drank out of a hose. We didn't come in till the street lights were on. We didn't even have any shoes. We came home to a this or that or the other. Like all of this stuff that's like, okay, great. But is that, oh, I'll give you something to cry about, right? Like, is that the type of parenting, if you could go back, would you want that type of parenting? No. So why are we seeing our evangelistic approach to be the same way? Yeah. Stop your crying. Stop your crying. Like Jesus has overcome the world. Thank you. Appreciate it. Right. Oh yeah. I know you might not be. Hey, blessed be you because your reward is in heaven. Great. But I'm hungry today. Those sorts of things. And it's like, it's very much boomer parent or latchkey kid upbringing. And some of you are going to hold on to that and go, well, that's how I was raised. So, I mean, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's like, if you could go back and do it again, would you change it, do it any differently? Like, I would hope you would. And understand that not everybody wants to be parented that way. So being evangelized to or proselytized to in that way is not healthy either. And I think we are seeing now that some of those traits were not healthy in the parenting realm. So therefore, we need to undo some of those pieces that we have in our religion, in our religious bringing, in the way that we enact the gospel, and see that Jesus is not our boomer parent, right? And that's not what's being blessed. No offense to your boomer parent, but it is like, how can you walk forward with somebody and go, almost in a new way of saying, like, I know you've heard it said before, but now I tell you. I know Christians have done this to you before, said this to you before, but I'm just going to sit here. And if you need something, you can let me know, right? I know Christians have tossed a coffee cup verse to you before, but I'm just going to give you a hug. And if you want to talk about the Bible and open it up, we can do that. But right now, I'm not interested in it. I'm just going to give you a hug, right? So those are the types of pieces. We've talked about this before. It's like bruising around an injury. You have to wait for some of that swelling to go down before you can actually fix what's in the core. And so for some people, we're like trying to fix what's in the core, and there's so much emotional swelling that needs to happen first, where we say, let me put some ice, let me put some rest, let me put some compression behind, some empathy behind this swelling for this injury. And once that level has gone down, if you're a parent, that's true, because if your kid is emotionally charged, like the first thing you need to say is, we're going to take a break. Once you're ready to talk about it, I'll be here to talk about it. But we're not going to accomplish anything right now by talking it through. So like from a religious standpoint too, allow some of that either emotion to come down, or like you said, fulfill some of the basic needs. Then we can talk about what's going on spiritually.
And I think what has happened, and this gets in, we said this season that we want to try to talk about how we fix these issues as well. And I think what has happened in the church world, because like I said at the beginning, I don't think this type of teaching had bad intentions, but you have pastors who I would bet most, if not all, at least a large majority, agree with what we've talked about in terms of loving people. And before you say the other stuff, they get that. But then they get on stage and they have 30 to 40 minutes to talk through an idea, and they try to be pithy so that it's sticky and memorable. And some of the nuance in the teaching gets dropped. And so what comes naturally to a pastor gets lost in the message that I say mostly he, because evangelical churches, mainly he preaching. And what he is saying, the nuance gets lost, and it's just this idea of, well, when you hear someone say something, think about how Jesus has done that for you and tell them about it. Because we dilute it down or systematize it into tools or ideas or whatever so that we can teach it and it's multipliable. But in those systems, the nuance is lost.
Yep.
So this is mainly for the pastors, but if any of you listening are any type of church leader or anything like that, if you teach people to look for gospel conversations as a form of care, they're going to think that's the most important way to go about it because the preacher man said it.
Right.
And you have to be explicit about the difference between listening to love and listening to respond. Because Eric, you and I you have preached in much larger settings than I have taught publicly, but we're both in the communications coaching realm in our businesses for marketing and all that. What we know as a fact is the curse of knowledge says what we understand at an 8 or a 9 level, we typically can only explain at a 5 or a 6 level, but the people we're talking to can only understand at a 2 or a 3. So well-meaning pastors and church leaders who are trying to teach their people how to spread the gospel and evangelize, nuances and intimate pieces of this have gotten dropped and lost in translation, lost in communication by no fault of anyone else. I want to stress that. Like, it was not intentional. But what it has led to is these people who live one way and then think, oh, well, the way I care for someone is just tell them about Jesus. And we are hearing more and more from people outside the church that it feels like they're just trying to convert me and not actually love me.
It's lazy. I mean, that's the other thing, is it's lazy. Is we've gotten in this lazy Christianity where, going back to the coffee cup verse thing, we understand Christianity. Even if you've been to like a cradle to the grave Christian, a lot of people understand Christianity based on coffee cup verses, or what you've talked about too, is like it's not first person sources, right? It's, oh, I only listen to what pastor says. I've never actually like read and studied on my own or sought out other stuff. But you get into this lazy Christianity of, if I just throw this verse out there, Jesus will do the rest. Does Jesus have the power to do the rest? Does the Holy Spirit have the power to do this? Yes. I believe so. However, is is there a bit of eye rolling going on in the Holy Trinity when you just throw out a pithy verse at somebody rather than sitting with them? You're missing the point. You're missing the point of what you're trying to do. You're being a lazy Christian, and you're commodifying care for people, and making it lazy and uninspired and missing the intent of Christianity. And I believe, that's a little bit of the source of when you talk about the parable of the sheep and the goats. And all the goats are on one side going like, Master, when did we not see you? When did we not do this? They're going like, when did we not understand? When did we not do what you wanted me to do? And it's like, oh yeah, remember when you threw out a Bible verse at somebody, or you said that when this guy lost he lost his wife and kids in a car accident, and you said when God closes a door, he opens a window.
Or you quote Job.
Uh, you missed it, bud. You missed it. That was definitely missing the heart of Jesus.
And I want to be as gracious with what I'm about to say as humanly possible. I want to.
Don't do it.
In the church world and within this version of cultural Christianity that we're talking about, where people are more discipled by evangelical culture than the Bible, those evangelical spaces are very insulated from the outside world. I am willing to bet most people don't even realize they're doing this. I am willing to bet they think and they believe throwing out a coffee cup verse or directly pointing to Jesus with no empathy or anything like that is the best way to care about someone, because that's what they've been taught.
Yep.
And so as I've been thinking through this episode and how to close it,
As I close,
um,
hold on. I'm a drummer, so I'm gonna get on stage. I'm gonna creep
you're going on
onto the
stage
stage
and sneak in, start the click.
Yep, that's right.
The guitar player is going to play. He's going to try to work in the Office theme.
Like a nice little pad underneath.
But he's going to try to work in the Office theme with some delay and some reverb so that no one really knows it's the Office. But
it's
he told his friend he's going to try to do it. Yeah.
Right.
Everything in me, and if you've been listening to the show for a while, you know I'm like this. Everything in me wants to fight up against people who do this and tell them they're wrong and scream at them. And I even put in our notes that we have to like boldly tell someone they're wrong if they're doing this. And I think we do need to tell them they're wrong. But as I've been thinking through it more, what's popped back into my head, and this is a strange thing to throw here, but at the Democratic National Convention this year, President Obama gave a speech. And in the speech, he said, and he's talking about Democratic policy, so take what he said and apply it to evangelical culture or the church or anything. He said, if we want people to realize that they're doing it wrong or that we have a better way, we have to slow down and walk them through it, because the world is moving fast for a lot of people and they only know what they know. So we have to approach them with grace and love and not just beat them over the head by telling them they're wrong about everything.
Right.
It was a weird thing to hear from a former president, given the political culture right now, but it stuck with me so much that we have to approach, if we're saying we have to approach people who are hurting with love, grace, and empathy, we have to approach the people in our lives who are unintentionally doing harm in the same way. If they're intentionally doing it, then yeah, call them out, do what you need to do. But if they don't even realize what they are doing is harmful, beating them upside the head is not going to help.
Right.
We have to love them just like we would love someone who doesn't know Jesus either.
Yep.
And so that's the tension. That's the Harper. That's the nuance in all of this. Because if we're going to love people, We've got to love both sides of this coin, even if they annoy us, even if we think they're doing something wrong, even if fill in the blank. We have to love people better so that we can show them Jesus instead of just telling them about them, because showing is going to be more effective than telling all day, every day, and twice on Sunday.
Yep. I think there's as I'll put the period on your close here, evaluating your intention is going to be the most important, because when I'm honest, I do those things in a negative way because I don't want to deal with it, because I don't want to do the work, because I'm lazy, because I'm afraid, because I can't handle those types of emotions, or I'm selfish and I can't get over myself enough to sit with somebody in their pain. And that's tough to admit. And I'm not great at it, but I think that's the first step towards actually extending that sort of empathy to others, and knowing that versus like turn the other cheek, or that whole piece, if they ask you to go a mile, go a second one, give them your coat as well. That takes effort, that takes time, because you're going, man, I actually want to win back my brother. I don't want to get rid of this feeling. I don't want to this. I don't want to that. I want to, whether it's in a personal issue, I want to win them back. I don't want them to go to hell. I don't whatever this. I don't whatever that. Like, if that's your true intent, then patience, empathy, kindness. I mean, go through the fruit of the Spirit if you want. Self-control is going to take time and energy, and it's going to take intentional thought and undoing, at least for me, undoing my natural urge for selfishness or self-preservation in order to care about somebody else, which is why you turn the other cheek, which is why you go the second mile, which is why you give the coat as well, because I need to die to my own self-interest and needs in order to take up the cross for someone else.
Love, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, like those are all things we need to be living out. And we have to live that out towards those who are hurting, and we got to live it out to those who are unintentionally hurting others as well.
Yep.
And that's hard. And it's going to take time. And we're all going to get it wrong. I'm going to get it wrong. I get it wrong all the time. That's part of the reasons I want to do this episode. Like, I've been discipled by this idea as well. And I've realized how harmful and hurtful it can be. And so I've had to legit repent and turn the other way to try to love people better. And if you're in that spot and that you thought the best way to love people was by to respond with these things, it's not too late. Like, you can realize you're wrong and change as well. It's never too late to change. So
True.
That's my encouragement to you. Like, let's love people better. Let's care for them the best we can. Let's show them Jesus before we tell them about him. And let's care about people's life here on earth at least as much as we care about their soul after life. We'll get to caring about it more later, but at
Let's do
least care
this.
about them as much.
How about
Now,
this? Why don't, especially for all the Theo bros, why don't we care about people's life here on earth at least to the same percentage as the New Testament talks about things here versus things in heaven?
yeah, there we go. All right, that's it. That's it for this week. Next week, we're going to be talking about how the obsession with end times theology for many cultural Christians is pushing people, especially young people, away from the church. If you want that episode when it comes out, subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app if you haven't already. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us on social or send us an email to continue the conversation. Eric is at EricW712 on all the major platforms. I am at Jonathan_Corona on them as well. You can email us at hello@tensionpodcast.com. If you like the show, do us a favor and rate it and review it wherever you get your podcasts. Share this episode with a friend if you found it helpful or interesting. As always, thanks for making us a part of your day, and we'll talk to you again next week. Have a great week, everybody.